Ah, welcome again to Cultural Anthropology. Today we're going to be talking about class and inequality. This is a subject that I think is rather important right now. I think considering all of the stuff that's happening in the world, I think that especially during the pandemic, especially with all the stuff that we are facing, I think this is a good time to have some of these discussions. Some of the stuff we'll be kind of catching up on from the last couple of weeks with race and ethnicity, but I think that and this is just going to kind of reinforce some of these concepts, and we'll talk about various issues like poverty and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and get started here. So we kind of have to understand like what is inequality within our culture, within human cultures, right? And it kind of goes back and forth between looking at wealth, power, who's got the resources, privileges, status, education. These different concepts are definitely indicators of equality. And when all of these things are, kind of level for everybody, there is equality. As I think all of us can kind of see right now, this is certainly not the case. Certainly not within our culture, but in many cultures around the world. And we're going to talk about how various cultures and various sizes deal with these concepts. So it's important to kind of pick out sort of some of the main reasons why we might have inequality. And they can also be expressed through these different concepts like, race and ethnicity and sexuality and gender, religion, all this stuff that we've been talking about. Even language can be an indicator of wealth, depending on where you are, what the prominent language is in the region that you're living. One of the things that if you recall the film The Linguists, one of the issues that they were facing when they were in Siberia was finding someone that spoke that language. And the problem is that the people who were seen as the speakers of that language were seen as gutter trash, right? It was seen as a lesser style language, and it was treated differently. So, each of the subjects that we sort of cover throughout this semester really does sort of lead into these different ways of the expression of power and the expression of wealth. So when you think about stuff going on today, think about that kind of stuff. See how that expression might be coming forth. Especially, I think it's really important to include language into this conversation. So I think if we're going to talk about this, we also have to understand how different societies sort of form themselves and what other options are compared to what we have. So if we go back in time, and in some cases we don't even have to go back in time. There are still cultures that practice this kind of lifestyle even today, which seems wild, but we'll get into that here in just a minute. So we have these egalitarian societies. Egalitarian societies are communities in which basically everybody pitches in and everybody benefits. So, if we go back before sort of like our modern concepts of civilization, our modern ideas about really like cities. If we go back 10,000 years, right at the beginning of agriculture. And agriculture is sort of how people start developing different concepts about life. And I'm not going to say that they're advancing in technology. And this is sort of where the idea of successful cultures come into place. You know, you might have successful culture that isn't high on technology, right? But we see this in about 10,000 years ago. We see these cultures that are starting to develop agriculture. And agriculture is essentially farming, okay? And what they're finding is that if they produce these various plants, and if they keep various herds of different types of animals, they can produce more food for less work, right? So more food with less people working. What that does is it kind of allows people to explore other lifestyles, other jobs. And so agriculture is kind of a huge first step into how society begins to change. So prior to that, and up until even today, we still have these different types of cultures that really aren't based on what we consider to be like contemporary cultures and cities. Like in the United States, we won't find anything like this. There are parts of Africa and Mongolia and China, India, and Australia, lots of places where you have remote, like really remote locations, where traditional lifestyles have been allowed to continue without modification by sort of modern culture, without much influence from us, right? So there are still places out there like this. So what is it about egalitarian society? So egalitarian societies usually don't have a lot of hierarchy. So there might be maybe a council of elders. There might be a few people that are sort of in charge for the most part, but really there isn't a whole lot of stratification between everybody. You know, everybody might have a specific job that they're particularly good at. And this is an interesting thing about egalitarian societies, is that sort of oftentimes it's believed that whoever is sort of best at that particular job is sort of in charge. So let's say you're like a top-notch hunter. Well, you know, if you're a top-notch hunter, you're probably going to be in charge of hunting, right? Seems about right. But you might not be the best fisherman. And so whoever the best fisherman is, when you go out with them, they're in charge. Okay, so that kind of makes sense. And the same way with going out and gathering supplies or dealing with other bands, other people. You know, it kind of depends on who's the best at whatever particular job is needed. And there are also oftentimes very small communities. So we might have a band can range between 40, 50, 60 people, maybe even more than that, depending on the situation. A few families, few extended families, that all come together and live and survive. And then also, bands are oftentimes nomadic. So they are going to be following usually a particular course that's kind of set out. So they'll go here for a while, and then they'll move over here, and then they'll move over there, and wherever the resources are good. So, and it also depends on the seasons. You know, sometimes seasonally this place will be much better than this place over here, especially if you've got various climates that you might have to deal with. So those are a few things that you have to kind of remember about the band size of a community. So one of the basic aspects of band-sized communities and egalitarian societies is this idea of reciprocity. Okay, reciprocity is this concept in which, if I give you something, you will give me something, right? Kind of makes sense. But it's a little bit different because in this case, it's not usually like an exchange or a bartering. It's kind of like I'm going to go out and I'm going to do a lot of hunting and I'm going to bring back some food and then I'm going to give that food to everybody. Right? Now everybody's got some meat for their table, right? And someone else might go out and they might go harvest a whole bunch of fruits and vegetables and whatever else, and they might bring that back, and then they'll share that with everybody, right? So everyone is contributing to the common good, right? And everybody is benefiting from the common good. And it doesn't necessarily matter how much you contribute, right? Sometimes you're going to contribute more, sometimes you're going to contribute less. That's not necessarily going to matter so much. So everybody does this. And then also, everybody does it with everybody else. So if you're out and you and your band, you're walking around and you're having a hard time finding any food, right? And everyone's getting a little skinny because you guys haven't had a lot to eat. And all of a sudden you come across another band of people. And fortunately for them, they've been more successful. And they're like, hey, listen, we've got some extra food. How about if we hook you up and we'll give you some grub. And then later down the line, if we need something, you will help us. And we would be like, yeah, all right, cool. That sounds good to us, right? So now you're creating a situation in which both sides are benefiting, right? Both sides are now forming a relationship to each other. And not only that, but if we're going to be sharing goods, we might be sharing people as well. This is a good time to hook up with somebody else on the other side and say, you know what, you're pretty cute. I think I'm looking pretty cute. I think maybe we should get together. And all of a sudden you've got families, relationships being built between these two groups. And that also helps to sort of solidify these relationships between two groups and sharing those resources back and forth. So the band level society is sort of egalitarian. Everybody's kind of looking out for each other, willing to share their resources. Sounds kind of idyllic, right? The only thing is that your pretty much entire existence is about gaining those resources. There isn't a lot of time to do anything else. Because most of the time your job is to find, the next few meals that you're going to need. So these bands of people that are roaming around, their level of technology might be quite lower than someone else, and their level of or the complexity, I don't want to say level, but the complexity of their religious beliefs or social behavior might not be as similar as other groups. It doesn't necessarily make them any less, just makes them different, right? Because they are very suited to what they do, and that's the level of development that they've gotten to. So egalitarian societies are egalitarian because of necessity. And it works. It works really well. It'd be kind of nice if we had more egalitarian societies within our own. We're not quite quite there yet. We do have ranked societies. Now, ranked societies are a little bit different when it comes to how people are structured and organized. So you might not necessarily have like a lot of difference between the different people that might be in that society. So there might be different levels. You might have, let's say we have a tribe of people that are going out, and you might have like a family or a couple of different families that are kind of in charge most of the time. And then you've got different families that aren't, right? And the likelihood of you actually engaging or expanding beyond your current level is pretty slim, right? You're probably going to be in your position for the rest of your life. There's no real upward mobility. Those positions that that you're going to be looking at are pretty well solidified. So, but this doesn't necessarily mean that the lifestyle is going to be all that different. And this is due to the fact that the concept of sort of like what makes a good leader, what makes a good society, is a little bit different, right? We have this term, whoever dies with the most toys wins. That's something I grew up with. That's this concept that whoever can go out and buy the most stuff and basically become the richest, or have the most toys, or have the prettiest things, to be the envy of everyone else. That's how we should do it, right? And that's good capitalism, right? That's good capitalism. But these cultures don't necessarily do that. In fact, to gain prestige within a society, you have to give away all of your possessions, right? I mean, can you imagine that? I mean, for you to be like the head honcho, the big guy, right? You have to give away everything. And that's what happened, right? You basically, whatever wealth that you end up gaining, it was seen as poor form if you kept it. So the idea was to still help the community. So as a chief, as a council or whatever, your jobs were to make sure that everybody got what they needed to have, and that pretty much everybody was equal in that distribution. So if you did this, if you got a whole bunch, your prestige within that community would go up, right? You'd be looking like, oh, hey, yeah, like you're pretty cool, and we really like you because you're hooking us up with all this stuff that we need. And this also happens when we look at, again, creating those relationships with other groups, right? Other communities that might need our help. And if we come up to another group and they're not doing so well, our group comes up, and our chief, he goes out there and says, hey, we got extra, we'll give it to you, no big deal. And all of a sudden they're like, wow, yeah, you're really cool, right? We dig you. So that's one way of gaining sort of that extra prestige within a community. And it's different. It's different when it comes to how we examine wealth and how we examine, how much our communities are worth and how much our people are worth. Do we distribute everything to make sure that everyone is doing fine and you live a simple life just like everybody else? So when we get to groups outside of bands, right? Now we've got tribes and chiefdoms. And tribes can essentially, they're still oftentimes nomadic, but they might practice more horticulture. They might practice some pastoralism, in which they might have seasonal places where they might grow food, right? Or they know where there's good places to grow some food, and they might take a stab at it there, or they might be pastoralists, and they might have animals that they take with them. So like goats and sheep and stuff like that, where, yeah, we might see a little bit more of this practice of bringing along herd animals that you don't have to go out and hunt all the time, and they can provide other resources too. A lot of pastoralists don't really eat their animals all that much because their animals provide different types of resources. And that's really important to understand, is that, yeah, they are providing different things. So with, say, like sheep, right? Well, sheep are really good at providing wool, right? So and that's a really big commodity, right? The more sheep you have, the more wool you have, the more, clothing and textiles and stuff like that you can make and then trade or give away. So you might not keep those sheep around to eat all the time because they provide other things. Then you get to like chiefdoms. And chiefdoms are now, this is sort of settling down into one area. Okay, there's going to be more of a societal rank, right? There's going to be more, and this is where you start seeing more horticulture, more agriculture, and people are diversifying their jobs. They're not just looking for gaining resources, but now they've got different positions. And this is where you start seeing sort of the beginnings of structured religion, right? Because now you can essentially look up at the stars and start asking questions like, why? Why are we here? What do we have for us? And now I can spend my time. I don't have to worry about eating because I can get someone to bring me food. So now I can spend my time doing research, right? Oh, yeah. And so all of a sudden you see a diversity of occupations coming forth in chiefdoms. But chiefdoms also redistribute, right? Redistribute their goods. And we're going to be talking about this redistribution of goods within these larger societies here in just a few minutes. So one example that I do want to bring up about sort of redistribution is this concept that we get out of the Pacific Northwest called the potlatch. And if that sounds vaguely familiar, it could be because it's sort of how our concept of the potluck, right? Oh my goodness, it sounds almost the same, right? Potlatch, potluck. It's this concept in which essentially you would bring stuff to redistribute, right? We do a potluck. We'll throw a party and we'll say, okay, BYOB, right? Bring your own booze, beer, whatever. Barbecue. Bring your own food. Bring a dish, right? And the idea is that you might not have to bring enough for everybody. Right? You don't have to bring enough for everybody, but you have to bring enough for more than just you. Right? That's kind of what a potluck is all about. You might not have to bring enough for everybody that's going to be showing up, but you are going to contribute to the welfare of everyone there. And it creates this sense of camaraderie. So if you've ever been to a potluck, you might have that cousin or friend or, relative, whatever, that shows up and, forgets to bring something, right? Or really doesn't put any effort into it. And it happens over and over and over again. What does that do to that person, that individual's reputation? Right? They come and they take your resources, they take your food, they eat it, but they don't contribute much. Well, in a potlatch situation, that might not necessarily be too bad of a thing because you're still helping out your relative / friend or whoever they are. It's about sharing those resources, and this person might not have those resources available, right? But what happens when you go to this person and all of a sudden they come into some wealth, and you go to their place for a party, and now they are putting out one heck of a spread, right? All of a sudden, now they're sort of giving back, right? So it kind of goes in this pattern of if you have a lot of resources, then you give out those resources. You would have tribes in the Pacific Northwest that they would have been collecting pelts all year, or they might have been collecting different types of food or just various resources. And they would throw a potlatch and invite their neighbors and their extended family and all of that stuff to come out. And guess what? They would gain prestige within that community because they're giving out all this stuff, right? They're bringing everyone together, and they're like, hey, we're gonna have a big party, and I'm gonna give away all of this. All of this is gone, right? You're good. This is cool. Hi, Bear. That was a light. Excuse me for that. So yeah, we've got this concept of how redistribution starts to look and what it can do to a community and how different people view resources and view goods, right? We contribute something as a community, and other communities come in and we give them stuff, right? And it solidifies this relationship between us. And then one of them, not to be outdone, right? You've got this group over here, and they're like, for the last couple of years, these guys have been like having these really awesome potlatches. And it's kind of like our turn. We need to gain some of that prestige back. And so, yeah. So they hold a potlatch, and they give all their stuff out. And what ends up happening? Well, you really don't lose out on anything, right? As you are redistributing your stuff, other groups are being like, hey, we need to redistribute our stuff too, and then you get stuff, right? What does that sound like? We'll talk about that here in a sec. So you've got these ideas about coming together, creating relationships, creating alliances between groups, and having this opportunity to share, right? To contribute to your community. Okay, so we've been talking about the potlatch. So let's do an exercise. What other ways do we distribute amongst ourselves today, right? What else do we do that we redistribute all of this stuff? And so as I was kind of alluring back to this last question, what do we do that kind of sounds like a potlatch, right? You've got stuff that you give to us. I've got stuff, so I'm going to give it to you, right? That reminds me of a couple of things. One, Christmas, right? If you practice Christmas, what do? You end up and you go and buy presents for your family and your friends. And what do your family and friends do? Well, they go out and they buy you presents, and you're just redistributing resources. But you're doing it in a way that is beneficial. Hopefully, you're going to get somebody something that they really want or really need, right? And so that's kind of what these potlatches are doing, is they are providing resources to other people. So, that's kind of this idea behind present giving. Another way of looking at this on a kind of a much larger scale would be taxes, right? Nobody likes paying taxes, but what happens with those taxes, right? Those taxes are basically redistribution. We provide money and resources, and our government provides us with protection, safety, a safety net, right? Our money goes towards our streets. I wish more of our money went to our streets, especially here in Colorado. Don't get me started on this. Then you've got police and fire and hospitals, and you've got schools and other resources, libraries, and what else do we have that we do? Military, and all the stuff that the government is supposed to provide for us, right? A healthcare system, right? A safety net in case something bad happens, to be able to provide resources. And this is a really, really interesting subject to be talking about right now. During a pandemic, during a time when we're dealing with job loss, and we're dealing with resources running out and people not having enough money. And, I think it was back in March or April or whenever it was, we got that stimulus check from the government, and it's like, $1,200, and it's like, woohoo, $1,200. Yeah, right on. And then it's like, well, maybe we'll get another one next month. And then politics get involved, and we're still waiting. And that's an issue. That's right there. We're looking at how the resources that the people provide are not getting redistributed, because everything that our government does is based off of our taxes, right? Our money that we pay out in sales tax and property tax and school tax. There's always a tax somewhere, right? Gas tax, right? We're taxing cigarettes, we're taxing food, we're taxing everything that we can tax, right? All that stuff, income tax, all that stuff that we make, all that stuff that we spend, all that stuff that we create, right? The government takes a bit of it and says, we're going to take this and we're going to apply this to the benefit of everybody else. That's the idea. What ends up happening is that the powers that be get involved, right? We're like, oh yeah, well, we're gonna take this money and we're gonna apply it to this, and then it's like, oh, well, shoot, maybe I don't want that to happen. And that's where a lot of our struggles when it comes to different ideas about politics, about the Democrats and the Republicans and the Independents and Green Party and all this stuff. They all want control of that money, of that tax money, of redistribution of that tax money. So taxes are huge. That's a huge thing, when it comes to the redistribution of wealth amongst ourselves. So, and we don't usually see it. And that's why we have a lot of people that don't like paying a lot of taxes. They don't want to pay, taxes for all of this because they're not seeing the benefit. And that's why taxes are oftentimes one of those subjects that is always kind of one of those subjects that it's difficult to talk about. it's difficult to get a consensus about, because guess what? We don't always see the results of those taxes. So, that's an issue. So what I want you to do for the discussion is I want you to come up with a couple of different ideas about how we redistribute resources. How do we give things away, right? And then expect those things back when it's our turn, right? There's a couple of hints right there. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and end this segment, and then we'll be back in a minute with part 2. All right.